Hello friends, my name is Igor Havrishchak. Today is Monday, June 2nd. I'd like to offer you the most important news from this crazy world. Of course, first and foremost, the news that concerns us, Ukrainians, and our Ukraine. What will we talk about? Putin's strategic nuclear aviation has been destroyed. Lavrov, in a panic, called and complained to the White House. For the first time, the US has commented on the security service of Ukraine's operation, Spider's Web. And the Russian delegation in Istanbul runs away from their own TV cameras when asked, what about the aircraft hit by the Ukrainian defense forces? Before we begin analyzing the most important information and the excellent work of the security service of Ukraine yesterday, June 1st, I'd like to ask you to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share your thoughts, suggestions, and questions. Write them in the comments. It's very important. And of course, like and share our conversation. This is important as YouTube's algorithms work this way, and it gives the pro-Ukrainian position a better chance of being heard more. And of course, we promote Ukrainian language content. Let me start with the words of the head of the security service of Ukraine, Malyuk. You may recall that yesterday a video appeared in which he commented. He said, "This is how beautiful the Bila airfield looks now, a strategic enemy airfield." Indeed, yesterday afternoon, over the course of 2 hours, Ukraine's defense forces carried out an unprecedented operation, truly without parallel in the world, striking the most important airfields of the Russian Federation and destroying a significant number of Russia's strategic-level aircraft. The Security Service of Ukraine announced that the Spider's Web operation caused an estimated $7 billion in damage to enemy strategic aviation. 34% of strategic cruise missile carriers at the main airfields of the Russian Federation were affected. The SSU will share the details of the special operation later. But the Security Service of Ukraine commented on everything that happened in Russia with the words of Lena Kostenko. Did you think Ukraine was simple? It's extraordinary, resilient, shaped by every force history has thrown. It has endured all kinds of trials. It is hardened by the strongest tempering. In today's world, it is priceless. Later in the evening briefing, President of Ukraine Vladimir Zelensky also commented on this operation. We can say for sure, Zelensky says, that this is a unique operation. The most interesting thing, and we can already say this publicly, is that the office of our operation in Russia was located directly next to the FSB office in one of their regions. Zelensky confirmed the SSU information that 34% of the strategic missile carriers of the aggressor state were destroyed. During the preparation phase, our people operated across different Russian regions, spanning 3 time zones. But on the eve of the operation, they were taken out of Russia and are now safe. At the same time, the president made it clear that the drones were not acting autonomously during the strikes on targets, but were controlled by operators. In total, 107 drones were used in the operation, and the corresponding number of drone operators were working, Volodymyr Zelensky said. By the way, he met yesterday with the head of the Security Service of Ukraine, Malyuk, and thanked him for the implementation of this operation. They joked around saying, this was done by Malyuk, and he's not even grown up yet. Which is funny because Malyuk actually means kid. In short, the attack was unprecedented. You already know and have heard that trucks approached the airfields on Russian territory very closely. Their trailers opened from above, and our drone operators began launching FPV drones that struck Russia's strategic aviation. We will talk about the number of destroyed or damaged aircraft later. About the world's reaction, what the press is saying. The Washington Post headlined, Ukraine just rewrote the rules of war. Washington Post columnist Max Boot compared yesterday's attack on Russian airfields to Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. Then the Japanese rewrote the rules of war, and now Ukraine has done the same. In the first case, the era of battleships came to an end, and now perhaps the era of manned aircraft. It is worth noting, by the way, you know that very well, that in December 1941 at 7 a.m., the Japanese attacked the Pearl Harbor base. 200 planes were destroyed and more than 150 were damaged. But what's interesting is that the occupiers themselves are now actively using Pearl Harbor in their rhetoric because they want to appeal to sympathy, hoping the United States will understand how difficult it is for them. They compare this attack on the Russian Federation's airfields to Pearl Harbor and try to explain it to Americans in that way. So Boot writes that the Ukrainians have demonstrated a vulnerability that should keep all the generals of the world awake at night. If Ukrainians were able to get drones so close to major air bases in a police state like Russia, what could stop the Chinese from doing the same to US air bases, or the Pakistanis to Indian air bases, or the North Koreans to South Korean air bases? The author noted. He is a bit mistaken, because now I will quote to you what the Russian war correspondents are saying. Belousov, the Minister of Defense of Russia, was previously proposed to build hangars for strategic aviation. We see how they built. At most, what they did was lay tires on the wings. And the most authoritative resource among the occupiers, fighter bomber, which is the first to report reliable information about the Russian Federation's aviation, says that the biggest question asked during their stream was, what will happen to those who place tires on the wings of the planes? And the video shows that the Russians tried to protect their aircraft from drones by putting tires on the wings. According to a Washington Post analyst, military personnel at air bases must now consider this threat. This will require huge investments in anti-drone systems. I want to tell you briefly what was flying, where and how, and what was being attacked. Ukraine attacked strategic bomber bases in Murmansk, Irkutsk, Ryazan, and Ivanovo regions. 4 military air bases were targeted: Olenya in Murmansk region, Diaghilevo in Ryazan region, Bila in Irkutsk region, and Ivanovo in Ivanovo region. The governor of Murmansk region, Chibis, confirmed the drone attack. Residents of Olenegorsk told about explosions and fire. The population was banned from staying in the city yesterday. The entrance to the city was closed. Moreover, all trucks are being checked in Russia, especially in the Irkutsk region. There are traffic jams because the Russians are panicking, afraid that there might still be a van with those drones somewhere. At Olenya Airfield, I remind you, 2 22M3 bombers are, or were, based there, aircraft capable of carrying nuclear weapons. This was part of Russia's nuclear triad, the very one they called untouchable, their so-called red line. Yet Ukraine's defense forces and security service wiped out one of its key components. We can see that one of the main red lines was destroyed by our defenders. In Irkutsk region, drones struck a military unit in Sredny village in Usolsky district. The strategic aviation of the Russian Federation was also there. In Usolsky district is the Bila military air base. It all started from there yesterday, and the strikes were demonstrated from there. And it was Malyak who showed this Bila base. It is home to the 200th Guards Heavy Bomber Aviation Brest Red Banner Regiment, which is equipped with strategic Tu-22M3 bombers. They were the ones attacked. The governor of the Ryazan region also confirmed the attack. At Diaghilevo airfield, bombers were based, Tu-22M3 and Tu-95MS. Finally, at Ivanovo airfield, long-range radar detection and control aircraft may have been hit. Those A-50s, the very ones that are essentially powerful airborne radar stations. 2 have been destroyed, unable to restore. And this is also a fundamentally significant hit. Overall, as a result of the security service of Ukraine operation personally led by Vladimir Zelensky, Vasyl Malyuk, the head of the security service of Ukraine, and the entire SSU team, more than 41 aircraft were destroyed. They say about 41, including A-50 AEW aircraft, as well as Tu-95 and Tu-22 M3 bombers. Total losses from the attacks exceeded $2 billion. It's directly about those aircraft. Associated with the Russian aerospace forces, as I've already mentioned, Fighter Bomber wrote that drones were used from very close range, making it impossible to get the aviation out of the strike zone or to deploy air defense. That includes the Pantsir, S-300, and so on. What did he write? Today will later be called a black day for Russian long-range aviation, and the day isn't even over yet. This is what he wrote yesterday. In general, the Russian Z-war correspondents in public forums are shocked. Speaking about the Irkutsk region and the Bila air base from which everything started yesterday, the local residents themselves recorded on video at least 8 planes that were completely burned out, I emphasize, totally destroyed. They're burning there, and there's absolutely no intact spot left. The following is known. 8 strategic aviation aircraft were hit. Thus, based on satellite images from Bila and monitoring sites at Olenia, it is now known for certain, as clearly seen in the videos, that 13 aircraft were completely destroyed. 8 Tu-95s, 4 Tu-22 M3s, and 1 An-12 transport plane. This is what is definitely seen as completely burned out. There is also aviation that hasn't been confirmed but is reported damaged. Moreover, neither Tu-95 nor Tu-22 M3, and possibly Tu-160 that was hit, are produced in Russia. They can barely change some spare parts, take them from other similar planes that don't fly, but the most important thing is that Russia cannot repair them. The world's reaction and the first reaction of the US. Elon Musk reacted to the unprecedented Operation Spider's Web. He wrote on his social media X that drones costing 1 million caused damage worth 1 billion. He simplifies things. Losses are actually much greater, but he wrote that drones are the future of warfare. Manned aircraft are not. The former commander of U.S. Army in Europe, Ben Hodges, also reacted. He responded very well to Donald Trump. He wrote on his social media, apparently Zelensky has some cards. This is a reference to February 28th during the scandal in the Oval Office, where Trump interrupted Zelensky and tried to tell him that we didn't have any cards in the hands. Here are the cards. It's just such a dark day for Russian aviation. On June 1st, Russians celebrated the Day of Military Transport Aviation. I think they will remember this celebration for a long time. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, the one who promised unprecedented sanctions against Russia, also reacted to the attack. The ever-resourceful Ukraine employed creative tactics to combat drones in order to successfully attack Russian bombers and military targets used to kill Ukrainian citizens and destroy their country, he noted. At the same time, Lindsey Graham emphasized that it is time for the world to act more decisively, to oppose Moscow's aggression, and to hold Beijing accountable. Russia, Graham says, is indiscriminately killing men, women, and children. It's time for the world to take a stand against Russian aggression by holding China and others accountable for buying cheap Russian oil that fuels Putin's war machine. If you want this war to end, make China help bring it to a stop. Let me remind you that Lindsey Graham and Democrat Blumenthal were in Kyiv and met with Zelensky. They are also traveling around Europe, meeting with officials in Germany and France. And Lindsey Graham insists that this infamous bill, let me remind you, this bill has support in the Senate, and if it passes, Trump won't be able to veto it. It would impose a 500% tariff on countries that buy energy resources from Russia. So referring to China in this context, if this bill is passed, then China, when buying Russian oil, will be forced to pay a 500% tariff to the United States on all goods it sells to the US. This is also very important, but again, many call this bill political and populist. Graham promises that it will be put to a vote before the G7 summit. The G7 summit is scheduled to take place on June 15-17 in Alberta, Canada. We'll be watching. What do the leading Russian Telegram channels say about the attack? One of the most authoritative is the Telegram channel Rubio. There are millions of subscribers. I quote, "As we mentioned earlier, strategic aviation aircraft like the Tu-95 and Tu-22 have long been retired from production, and there are no means to restore them. Accordingly, these losses cannot be recovered. This is, without exaggeration, very serious damage to the strategic component, caused both by serious mistakes in the work of the security services and by a negligent approach, as they put it, and generally irresponsible attitude towards shelters for the aircraft." So they are shouting there as much as they can. Moreover, I want to tell you that the Russians say they have supposedly already detained some people believed to be involved in this attack. Everyone, Vladimir Zelensky said, was expelled from the territory of the Russian Federation. In the context of this attack, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs got really upset, and Lavrov immediately, in emergency mode, requested a call to the White House. Foreign Minister Lavrov and Secretary of State Marco Rubio held a phone conversation on Sunday after Ukrainian attack on. The US State Department noted that the call took place at the request of the Russian Federation. At Russia's request, Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke with Foreign Minister Lavrov. He reaffirmed President Trump's support for continued direct talks between Russia and Ukraine to secure lasting peace. Notably, the official State Department statement makes no mention of any strikes. And here's how Russian media report it. They say that Lavrov discussed the meeting scheduled for today in Turkey, the second one. Also, Russian media claim that Marco Rubio expressed condolences regarding the deaths caused by, remember, the bridges that were blown up in the Kursk and Bryansk regions. The Russians are trying to blame this on some Ukrainian special services and so on. But the State Department does not mention anything about expressions of regret. So the Russians make up such things and write them. Overall, what's important to know is that the United States absolutely knew nothing about this operation. CBS News reported that the White House was not informed of Ukraine's plans for a major strike on Russian strategic aviation. The report summarizes the day's events and notes that White House officials declined to comment on the attack. Administration sources said that the White House did not know this was going to happen. The same was confirmed by another agency, Axios. They also have their reliable sources. Let me remind you, it was Axios that first revealed the U.S. peace plan, which Kit Kellogg, Trump's special envoy for Ukraine, took to London. And they were the first to name these points. Moreover, we understand that Ukraine did not receive intelligence from the U.S. about where Russian strategic aviation is located, when and where it will arrive, or where it will be at any given moment. So, as you can see, we can still carry out historical operations without intelligence from the United States. Moreover, I want to tell you that many experts say, including Israeli ones, that this operation exceeds the pager operation. Do you remember when thousands of Hamas members were blown up because of their pagers? They say it's top, it's the best thing they could see. I think history will repeatedly mention the unprecedented nature, uniqueness, and success of the operation called Spider's Web. And today, on June 2nd, there will also be a meeting in Istanbul between the delegations of Ukraine and Russia. Our delegation is headed by Rustem Umerov, Minister of Defense. Yesterday, a delegation from Russia arrived in Istanbul. It is in the same composition as it was on May 15-16, headed by Medinsky. The most interesting thing is that Ukraine handed over the memorandum to the Russians, but Medinsky complained that our side, Ukraine, handed over the document in two languages, English and Ukrainian. He boasted there that in our delegation they know Japanese, but I think it's a very correct step, and the whole essence lies in the nuances, in the details. The most interesting thing is that the Russian delegation ran away in shame yesterday. Medinsky drove up to the hotel, and as he was getting out of the car, representatives from propaganda media approached him. The journalists asked Medinsky a question about strikes by the Ukrainian army on Russian airfields. However, he suddenly stopped communicating and left the location. He replied that he had seen everything, knew everything, everything tomorrow, he said, trying to avoid further dialogue. There was a Russia 1 microphone there, a disgusting blue one. They approached Medinsky, asked what he thinks about these strikes. He left quickly, saying, "We'll tell you everything tomorrow." So the delegation is running away from the cameras because they know that this was a phenomenal strike. Reuters says they already know what's in the Ukrainian memorandum that Ukraine has submitted to the talks scheduled for June 7th. The proposed roadmap begins with a complete ceasefire for at least 30 days, followed by the exchange of all prisoners on both sides, as well as the return of Ukrainian children taken to the territory of the Russian Federation. After that, a meeting between President Zelensky and dictator Putin is scheduled. According to this plan, Moscow and Kyiv, with the participation of the United States and Europe, will work to agree on the conditions for a complete cessation of the war. Ukrainian officials sent the draft document to the Russian side in advance. Media reports note that the key points of Ukraine's proposed peace agreement largely align with Kyiv's previously stated demands. What do they include? The absence, this is important, of international recognition of Russia's sovereignty over parts of Ukraine occupied by Moscow's troops. Reparations for Ukraine, and most importantly, Ukraine does not have to be neutral and can be part of NATO while moving towards European Union membership. Ukraine's membership in NATO depends on consensus within the alliance. No restrictions may be imposed on the number, deployment, or other parameters of the armed forces of Ukraine, as well as on the deployment of military-friendly foreign contingents on the territory of Ukraine. The document also states that the current front line will be the starting point for negotiations on territorial issues. Let me remind you that the United States also supports at least two positions that coincide: an immediate ceasefire and the starting point along the current line of contact. This is absolutely unacceptable to Russia. We don't care, we are just voicing it. Let me remind you, according to information sources after the negotiations on May 15-16, Medinsky stated that Russia offers to renounce any reparations, to renounce lawsuits. Moreover, they mention the size of the army, about Ukraine's neutrality. The conditions on the part of the terrorists are absolutely unacceptable. What can we understand? These negotiations will take place, they will meet. If an agreement is reached on the exchange of prisoners of war, which will not be all for all, since Russia is not interested in this, this will be the most important thing that can be achieved. It will not be possible to agree on anything else with the Russians in these talks, because Ukraine's position is clear and precise. And what the Russians want is absolutely unacceptable. Moreover, in fact, no one knows what the Russians want, because they have not delivered the memorandum they promised, neither to the United States nor to Ukraine. So let's wait for the conclusion of these fruitless negotiations, and let me remind you that Russia is stalling for time, and at the same time continuing its military aggression against Ukraine. And in conclusion, in Poland, Karol Nawrocki won in the second round of the presidential elections. The National Electoral Commission has published the results, having counted 100% of all polling stations. The director of the Institute of National Remembrance, Karol Nawrocki, scored almost 51%. His opponent, Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski, received just over 49%. Overall, the presidential election in Poland was one of the most intense. They were held in 2 rounds. Interestingly, exit polls showed Trzaskowski winning, but we see that Nawrocki won. Trzaskowski is a liberal mayor of Warsaw. I will say a few words about who our neighbors are. A representative of the ruling Civic Platform Party, he is a supporter of European integration, judicial reforms, and support for LGBT rights. Karol Nawrocki is a conservative historian supported by the opposition Law and Justice Party, who stands for traditional values. What Nawrocki said about Ukraine is important to us. At the beginning of the year, Nawrocki said that he did not see Ukraine in international alliances until Kyiv was held accountable for Volyn tragedy. In May, he promised not to let Ukraine join NATO. This was part of an agreement with the candidates who were eliminated in the first round. He said that he would sign memorandums opposing Ukraine's accession to NATO and would receive support from other candidates in return. According to Nawrocki, Ukraine treats Poland unfairly. Quote, "I have my own view on the Ukraine conflict caused by Russian aggression, and I'll repeat it. I'm certain Russia is responsible for the war." But he adds, the naivety and foolishness of European political elites, and sadly their Polish aide Donald Tusk. We understand, he mentions the opponent. Nawrocki also said that he is disappointed with Zelensky on many issues, but he believes that Ukraine should be at the negotiating table. And Nawrocki is against the movement. Obviously, he will not be so happy to welcome Ukraine to the European Union with open arms. I don't think he will categorically say no to Ukraine in the European Union, but it should be understood that a person who is less friendly, to put it mildly, to Ukraine, has become president in Poland. By the way, Duda also mentioned the Banderites in his recent broadcasts, but it is possible and necessary to work. Diplomacy is always effective. Ukraine has repeatedly faced the fact that it has to put pressure somewhere, negotiate and make some compromises and hear each other. I think there will be no questions here. It is also worth noting that Poland is a parliamentary country, but we know that Tusk's coalition is also going through difficult times right now. Nothing terrible has happened. We need to work. We need to continue to unite our partners, because we know perfectly well that in the face of a full-scale invasion, democracy and democratic values in Europe do not allow for quick decision-making. And we understand that the leadership of countries like Slovakia and Hungary are always ready and willing to put a spoonful of tar into our coalition barrel.